Hi. Many greetings to all of you. This is Dr. Jane Galloway coming to you with episode 3 of our podcast on the gateways, the wisdom of 12-step spirituality. I'm very excited to talk with you all today because this is really, in some ways, I think this is the gateway, this is the step, this is the developmental moment that makes things not just having to do with sobriety or with anything involved with addiction or recovery work, but really everything in life. It's about making a decision, and it's about saying yes. So I'm very excited to talk with you about this today and take a look at some of the ways that the Gateways gets into this. First of all, I really wanted to have a little chat with you guys today about how this work began, and I think I've said something about it. I know I have, and I've talked about it in various ways. But here's the thing: I am very, very interested in developmental psychology. Developmental psychology means that you start by building a base, and then you develop to a next level. I think I was first really exposed to what this was all about when I was teaching preschool years ago in New York City, and I began studying early childhood education and reading Jean Piaget. And Piaget really talked about the growth of children and about the different developmental levels. So what you're really ready to learn or what you're ready to take on at a certain age and physical developmental level is the kind of stuff that he really talks about and gets teachers engaged with, teachers and parents, of course, too. So I think really my interest in developmental psychology and developmental teaching and growth began with Piaget way back in the 70s. And so I was always inclined in that direction. And then, of course, I began my experience with the 12 steps in the late 70s, 1978. But then when I went back to school to study about really what the steps are all about in recovery, I went back actually to study to be an alcohol and drug counselor and ended up being an alcohol and drug educator. So kind of a little difference in that situation. I didn't want to do the day-to-day part of counseling, and I actually learned that in a funny way too, because through some of my fantastic classes with very smart professors, I learned that I'm really much more interested in sharing the big idea with people and then helping people to find resources so they can do the daily work of all this on their own. And so my professor really said to me, this is a great diagnosis and great treatment plan, but where's the the weekly, day-to-day, weekly treatment plan breakdown? And I said, I'm not really interested in that part. And she said, I'm not either. That's why I'm a teacher. I suggest you think about that. So that was really helpful. So I'm an alcohol and drug recovery educator and learned so much about the physiological effects of alcohol, drugs, and our own hormones, et cetera. But one of the classes that was required as part of this course of study was developmental psychology. And wow, was that cool. I just loved it. And, of course, it took me back to the early days of learning Piaget. And I think really my interest went even further back because I had many breaks in my own childhood sense of security, starting very, very young. And so I've just always been the kind of person who was going to make it, whether I had had a huge trauma or not. And as I look back, I'm amazed that I made it over some of the unbelievable hurdles. I climbed, jumped, whatever. But so I was always going back saying, wait a minute, wait. I feel like I missed something. I feel like I missed something because of all these different moves and various traumas of various kinds in my early years. I feel like I missed something that I need in order to do this next thing that I really want to do. So I was always inclined to looking at the idea of developmental psychology. But okay. So probably it came even before, is what I'm saying, even when I was a kid. But so I'm in college as a person already quite immersed in the 12-step program, and I was studying developmental psychology, and I became very, very fascinated in learning about people like Abraham Maslow, who was really an amazing leader in the positive psychology movement, and people who looked at human potential, but from a psychological perspective. So let me explain. So always before this, and I mean really, from the time Sigmund Freud was looking into the psyche, which was in itself a huge leap forward, people realized there was something else going on inside of people, and that it had to do with probably emotions, et cetera. Anyway, so from Freud and, looking at all these strange, abnormal things people were doing that were way out of the norm, the general norm, I began to look at this work of Maslow and then learn that, wow, there's a whole other way of looking at human beings. And there was indeed a movement called positive, strength-based social work really being birthed right then when I was studying this stuff. We're very close to it. So in other words, Freud and those guys were studying abnormal psychology. So when you went in to learn how to be a psychologist, what you learned was the most aberrant behavior, and then you tried to apply that to somebody who may not quite have that degree of dysfunction. But it was illness-based, so no wonder people used to really rebel if you said, maybe you'd like to seek out some therapy. Therapy? I don't need therapy. What do you mean therapy? Well, yeah, so some of that was really critical to understand. That was an illness-based approach, but the developmental approach I was learning when I was studying about the alcohol and drug studies program was exposing me to Abraham Maslow, who said, look, what I want to know is what are the common traits in highly actualized people? How do they live? How can we learn from them? And that really began a whole revolution in my thinking. And if there's any basis of what my work is about, strength-based recovery, et cetera, it started there. It's really about we have a lot more good about us to have made it through some of the things we all went through in childhood, frankly. We have a lot more good about us than we have defective about us. And I don't even like using that word defective. It does come up in the steps, and I think it's really outmoded. Anyway, okay, so I began to get really interested in these developmental levels. So what Maslow talks about is he said you have to develop a base first before you can go out into the world and become a rocket scientist and take a space shuttle off into the stratosphere. You have to be able to meet your basic needs. And so he was talking about something we talk about in the 12-step program, sex, security, society, meaning we have to get our stuff together. We have to be able to pay our rent or our mortgage. We have to be able to put food on the table. We have to be able to have a modicum of security and stability in our lives before we can really move forward and do a lot of other really highly creative things. So I started seeing a correlation there. Okay, wait, so AA is dealing with this, and developmental psychology deals with this. Then, over the years, I began really drawing. So this book began as a visual exercise. I began drawing in colored markers a lot of different developmental models, and there are a lot of them. It turns out there are a whole lot of developmental models in the spiritual way of describing things, the metaphysical way of describing things, in an even kind of broader theological construct. That's called a cosmology. Where does everything stand, in terms of where's God, where are you, where's everybody standing, who's on first, what's on second. Anyway, so I started drawing. I drew the 12 steps, and then I drew what some of the basic principles were of the 12 steps. And right next to it, I found myself drawing the chakra system. Wait a minute, these really correlate. The root chakra is all about it's the root. It's the root chakra, and it's about security, and it's about grounding. It's about financial stability, providing for our basic needs. Okay, so that really correlates with the first step. Admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. The first 3 steps, though, really correlate with the lower chakras, which are below the navel. And so I started drawing those. Then I began to study Chinese medicine. And wait a minute, the Chinese meridian system goes throughout the body and talks about stabilizing the qi, the energy in a person's body. All right, so I started drawing that. And then I drew Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Then I began studying Erik Erikson's 8 Ages of Man. Wait a minute, he says we start out with kind of a beginning idea of how we're going to impact the world, and we develop through our lifetime. So again, they're all developmental models. So my interest in creating what eventually became the gateways started with this kind of inquiry, and it really had to do with developmental models. Okay, so I have to start here and then go to the next step. A lot, to have a firm foundation. So a lot of us, I will speak for myself, and since I'm the only one speaking on this podcast, I have to speak for myself. I really needed some filling in terms of how to have a strong, solid base. So I learned that through working the steps and then through adding many of these other tools and modalities, utilizing the steps along with utilizing the chakras and that energy system and blah, blah. So that's how this book came to be. So if you can understand it as a way of looking at a strength-based growth, utilizing the 12 steps as the spine of the system, but bringing in and correlating all of these other spiritual systems that go along with it, that's kind of a good way to see it. I hope I get some feedback on this from some of you, so you can let me know that I'm getting through, that you're seeing it as visually as I'm seeing it, and that may not be possible, but I hope it is. Anyway, so that's how all this started. So in the AA literature, there's actually a wonderful little book. It's a small, tiny little book called the Little Red Book, and it really deals with the very basic things. And there's another book called Stools and Bottles, and it's another little tiny book too. Both of these books talk about again, it's interesting, about this developmental model. So sometimes when we get way out there or feel really like the world is spinning or things aren't going well, really, if you're working the steps as some part of a system of things that work for you in your life, you will know intuitively to go back to basics and say, you know what, I really have to get my financial picture in order right now. I really have to get this layer of my life in order right now before I move forward into something else. So it kind of becomes an intuitive thing. But one of these little books, Stools and Bottles especially, talks about the first 3 steps as a 3-legged stool, and that this really provides the basis. And if you think about it, the 3-legged stool is kind of an ingenious device, and it's a process of balance, isn't it? Because it's not 4 legs, it's 3, and so they have to be placed exactly in the right relatedness to one another. And then those 3 legs, though, if they're placed in the right place on a stool, really hold that thing together and create a good solid base. A grown man can sit on a small 3-legged stool and have the thing hold up because it has really a good strength about it in terms of how it's put together. So the analogy is often used that steps 1, 2, and 3 are like a three-legged stool. So we're at step 3, and this is actually, I would say, my favorite step, because all of the rest of these things and steps, there are many action steps, etc., but they're process-oriented, and so is this. But this one really says it all, especially it says it all in terms of my work, because my work is on the wisdom of 12-step spirituality. So I want to lift that out. I'm not saying how you have to recover or anybody has to recover or not recover, but the wisdom path of this particular model of spirituality definitely rests on having a firm foundation and continually really going back and then really fortifying that foundation, okay? So here's what it says. Made a decision. I love those words, because until we've decided something, forget it. We can decide, I'd like to do this. I'd really like to go back to college. I'd really like to do this. I'd like to do that. But until we actually make a decision, not a lot is going to happen, because you can always jump off that ship, right? So made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understand God, praying only for God's will for us and the power to carry that out. Now, this is deep. I mean, this is really, really deep. This has to do with, wow. It has to do with it has to do with deciding that we are going to relinquish the illusion, and I really want to stress that word, the illusion of control, because we're not running much in this universe. The universe is really the matrix in which we live, move, and have our being. But those of us who become addicted, some to control, some to alcohol, drugs, it's all kind of a way of feeling safe, but also of deciding that, look, thank you very much, universe, stars, planets, God, goddess, whatever it is, I'll take over from here, because things haven't worked out that well for me when I trusted you, adult, or you, this person. So I am going to get back in the driver's seat. So this is a huge thing. Made a decision. And actually, when I quoted it before, I kind of combined the 3rd and the 11th step, and they are related, because they're both about the life of spirituality that is opened up through these 12 steps, the working of the 12 steps. But this one is made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understand God. So this, another thing to hear in all this is that, it's not to God in my version. Nobody's telling you how you have to understand this larger power of the universe. You can see it as the rushing wind. You can see it as the Great Spirit. You can see it as, a lot of people in the 12-step program say, I call my higher power Harry. It doesn't matter, but it means it's not you. You have that power in you, but that power is what's breathing you, okay? So this is a huge moment where we make a decision to turn our will. Now think about this, to turn our will, our self-will, our will, over to the care of God as we understand God. That is really pretty huge. So it's my favorite step, and it's where the real work begins in the program. We're after this, kind of a fulcrum on which the whole process of spiritual growth within the program rests, comes after this. So it's pretty exciting. So this is the 3rd leg on the 3-legged stool. And, it correlates with, as do the other ones, with certain organs. And I'm going to read those to you and let you really, this is really a step of surrender, just like the first one is. It's a relinquishing of self-will and a decision, remember that word, decision to rejoin the bow of the universal Om, the flow. We're getting on the bow of that ship, and we're going forward with the universal Om, which is sailing through the sea of eternity. We are not trying to control both the waves and the ocean. When we are experiencing the need to go deeper or go mad, we will say yes to almost any source of relief. But not just any source of relief will work. We have already tried that road, and anybody who's coming into working these steps has tried a lot of different roads. Okay, so make a decision to turn our will and our life over to the care of God as we understand God. Pretty cool. Willing surrender of human limitation is what we recognize in Gateway 1, right? We admit we're powerless over something. And 1 leads into this process then of, okay, well, if I'm not running this, what is? To the process of coming to believe in a higher power. So that's Gateway 2, and that's followed by this great moment, this made a decision. So now we're at the doorway of deciding. The power of yes is what we talk about in the gateways as correlating with this step and with this gateway, the power of yes. The difference between saying no and yes is pretty major, right? So this is all about the power of yes. And the musical note that correlates with this level of development, remember this is a developmental system, so the musical notes are E and E flat. The visual form of this particular chakra is an upside-down triangle edged in red in the yellow field, surrounded by a 10-pointed flower, and actually it's quite beautiful. So this is the third chakra. This third chakra is influenced, fits perfectly with the gateway's essence of yes, as it influences self-esteem, warrior energy, and the power of transformation. And it correlates with the solar plexus, the point of volitional power. So it is all about choosing. This is the step of choosing. There is a power in yes, right? So we're at the third chakra. We're at the third gateway. The name, if you're interested, of this chakra is Manipura Gabhi. And the functions that it controls: will, social self, power to act. And again, the color is yellow. So we've gone from red to orange to yellow. And so now we're putting that on as a three-legged stool. So we're at the power, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understand God. Okay, let's do a ritual. Some of the research that I did when I was going to seminary and studying I was very, very interested in African traditions. And so as I studied some ancient African depth traditions in spirituality, I learned that, well, wait a minute, before Christianity was ever an idea in anybody's mind in these different tribal regions in Africa, there was a process going on of baptism. That also is biblical. I mean, the reason John the Baptist baptizes Jesus is because there is the Jewish process of, there's the mikvah, which is the purity bath, but there's also a process of immersion, of ritual cleanliness. So baptism, this idea of going down into water and coming back up again, is just very, very powerful, and you can remove all the theology from it. So water ritual has really been a part of sacred observance since the beginning of recorded history. Submerging in a pool of water, coming forth brand new, is a powerful symbolic act and one that has a transformative effect. So there are a couple ways to deal with this. One is to really get engaged in actually a baptism process, and there are a lot of different ways you can do that and a lot of different spiritual paths. I want to talk today about the idea of pouring libation, because this is dealing with water too, and it's something you can kind of do a little more on your own, because if you're going to do a baptism, you probably want somebody to be there with you. A libation is a ritual pouring of a liquid as an offering to call forth God or Spirit and the ancestors. So we're calling forth the ancestors. Those who have transitioned from the physical realm dwell in the world of the ancestors. We honor them by summoning them forth and bring them into our midst as supporters as angels in our midst, if you will. Libation was common in many religions of antiquity and continues to be offered in many cultures today. Various substances can be used for libation, most commonly water, wine, olive oil. In India, ghee or clarified butter is used. The vessels used in the ritual often have a significant form, which differentiates them from secular vessels, so differentiates them or consecrates them, set aside for a holy purpose. The libation can be poured into something of sacred significance or poured into a potted plant even, or just into the earth. So here's this ritual. Fill a pitcher or glass with water, and with reverence and the offering of a prayer, pour the water in a ceremonial manner. I'm having trouble saying that word. Ceremonially into a plant or onto the earth. The prayer should be one that honors the lineage from which you come, your ancestors and the ancestors of your ancestors. So in so doing, you summon the power of deep connection to your endless lineage of support in the invisible, right? So, wow. The Bible says you're surrounded by a host of silent witnesses, and this is actually calling them forth. Very powerful process. So at the end of the ritual, and there are some powerful chants and calling songs that can go along with this, and actually you can make up your own. If you're calling forth your lineage, there's something really at the core of your beingness that knows what resonates with those ancestors. And so it's a powerful way to call them forth and to really summon them into the visible, summon them into, I mean, you may not see them with your eye, but they're visible to the third eye. They're visible to the spiritual eye. And so this idea of pouring libation, and at the end of this, as with every ritual, we always give gratitude. We give thanks. Really do a strong activity of saying thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you for communing with me. Thank you for creating me with each new breath. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And then move on. And the water has been poured into another source, especially the earth or a vessel of some sort, where it can then go back into the earth. So it's a completely holistic kind of thing. There is no waste, but it's always bringing forth something new. This is a wonderful way of solidifying the powerful, powerful action of this gateway. So as you can tell, I hope you can tell, I'm pretty excited about this level. I even talk about it in a short video that you can find on my website at janegalloway.com, where I talk about this. I talk about this idea of making a decision. You can find all of you can find the podcasts and videos and many wonderful things, but specifically about the gateways, you can find this podcast and the entire series of podcasts on Sacred Stories Media at iTunes. So I really recommend you check that out. Check out Sacred Stories Media. And the publisher of this book is Sacred Stories Publishing. So if you're interested in buying the book to learn more about each one of these developmental layers and all of the different psycho-spiritual technicolor elements of this kind of growth in spirit, you can buy the book through sacredstoriespublishing.com or on Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, and really actually any online bookseller. There are quite a few who are selling the book. But make sure to go to sacredstoriesmedia.com and look at that on iTunes. Okay, check out iTunes. You're going to, actually, you will not only find my podcast, but you're going to find some other really fantastic spiritual teachers, thought leaders, people who are looking at these kinds of ideas from a deep level. You're going to be pretty amazed. So I really strongly recommend Sacred Stories Publishing and Sacred Stories Media on iTunes. Okay, so we've made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understand God. It is a powerful moment. And so what I want to wish you for this next couple of weeks until we get on into the next layer of the work is really a strong, visceral, and internalized sense of the stability that this kind of building of a foundation creates. It creates it in the invisible, and we call this sacred geometry. So in other words, it exists. You can even envision that three-legged stool. You may not have an actual three-legged stool made out of wood sitting right in front of you, but you can envision that stability that is undergirding you and supporting you. So I offer this as a great meditation on Gateway 3. So remember, we've now got our three-legged stool, made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understand God. Okay, my friends, so look forward to checking in with you, looking at Gateway 4 and beyond, and hearing how working these different rituals and looking into the steps, this expansion of the power of the steps is working in your life. Peace and blessings, and talk to you soon. See you around.